गणेशाय नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम् जातवेदसे सुनवामसो ममराति यतो निदहाति वेदः स नः पर्षदति दुर्गाणि विश्वानावेव सिन्धुं दुरितात्यग्निः तामग्निवर्णां तपसा ज्वलन्तीं वैरोचनीं कर्मफलेषु जुष्टाम् दुर्गां देवीगुं शरणमहं प्रपद्ये सुतरसि तरसे नमः अग्ने त्वं पारयानव्यो अस्मान् स्वस्तिभिरति दुर्गाणि विश्वा पूश्च पृथ्वी बहुलान उर्वी भवातोकायतनया यशयोः विश्वानि नो दुर्गा जातवेदः सिन्धुन्न नावादुरिताति पर्षि अग्ने अत्रिवन्मनसा गृणानोऽस्माकं बोध्यविता तनूनाम् पृतनाजितगुं सहमानमुग्रमग्निगुं हुवेम परमात् सधस्तात् स नः पर्षदति दुर्गाणि विश्वाक्षामद्देवो अतिदुरितात्यग्निः प्रत्नोषि कमीड्यो अध्वरेषु सनाच्चहोतानव्यश्च सत्सि स्वाञ्चाग्ने तनुवं पिप्रयस्वास्मभ्यं च सौभगमायजस्व गोभिर्जुष्टमयुजो निषिक्तन्तवेन्द्र विष्णोरनुसञ्चरेम नाकस्य पृष्ठमभि संवसानो वैष्णवीं लोक इह मादयन्ताम् कात्यायनाय विद्महे कन्याकुमारि धीमहि तन्नो दुर्गिः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Om Sri Sai Ram, offering our loving pranams at Bhagwan's lotus feet. Most beloved Bhagwan, Honorable Chancellor Sri K. Chakravarti Sir, revered Vice-Chancellor Professor B. Raghavendra Prasad Sir, Controller of Examinations Sri Sanjay Sahani Sir, distinguished guests, Director of all the campuses, Deans, Head of the departments, faculty members, alumni members, research scholars, and dear brothers and sisters. A loving Sai Ram and warm welcome to this national workshop on macro stabilization policies for India during the post-pandemic period. It is indeed our privilege to have students, scholars, academicians, and policymakers to have come to a single platform to share and discuss the vast macroeconomic landscape of our nation. These sessions are pertinent in present times as our economy navigates through its recovery during the post-pandemic era. To auspiciously comment our event, may I humbly request our esteemed dignitaries to grace us by lighting the ceremonial lamp. sirs. May I cordially invite Dr. G. Raghavendra Raju, Head, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, to deliver his welcome address.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Offering our collective pranams at the divine lotus feet of our beloved Lord, Bhagavan Shri Sathya Sai Baba Varu. Esteemed Chancellor, Shri K. Chakravarti Sir, revered Vice-Chancellor, Professor B. Raghavendra Prasad Sir, respected Registrar, Professor B. IGIDR Sir, respected Controller of Examinations, Shri Sanjay Sahani Sir, esteemed speakers for today's workshop, the directors of all the 4 campuses, the deans of various faculties, the heads of the departments, the faculty members, the research scholars, dearest students, and everyone who has joined us physically and virtually. A loving Sai Ram to all of you. First and foremost, on behalf of the organizing team, we welcome you all to this one-day national workshop on macro stabilization policies for India during the post-pandemic period, which is organized by the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Sri Sathya Institute of Higher Learning, Prasanthi Nilayam campus. Our warm welcome especially to the 4 speakers for today, Professor Ashima Goyal Madam, who will be joining us virtually, who is a distinguished member of the Monetary Policy Committee and also an Emeritus Professor at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, IGIDR, Mumbai. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy Sir, who is currently the Vice-Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Deba Prasad Rath sir, who is the Principal Advisor, Department of Economic Policy and Research at this RBI Central Office, Mumbai. Welcome you, sir. And Dr. G.V. Nadhanael, who is currently the Director of the Division of Reports and Knowledge Dissemination, again at DEPR, Mumbai. Welcome you, sir. We extend our sincere thanks to all the 4 distinguished speakers who, despite of their demanding schedules, have honored our invitation and are with us today to share their expertise with all of us. Since the establishment of this department in 2003 with the post-graduation programs, we have often organized annual conferences, workshops, seminars. Over the years, we have been having a great privilege to host eminent personalities, including, to name a few, Dr. Arjun Sen Gupta sir, Dr. Ashok Lahiri sir, Dr. Kirit Parekh sir, Dr. Vijay Khelkar sir, Professor Mahendra Dev, Professor Radhakrishnan, Dr. T.C. Anant, and so on. One of the important aspects of this conference since the inception has been, Professor Pandit sir's idea was to always have a mix of different stakeholders. He always used to insist of ensuring that we have academicians, we have policy makers, we have theorists, we have corporate people, so that we get a holistic approach. And not to take away from this genesis, today also it's all Bhagavan's grace that we have 2 academicians, I mean if you can say so. We have Bhanumurthy sir, who is an academician and a researcher, and also Dr. Ashima Goyal ma'am, who is a academician as well as a researcher. And we have 2 practitioners with us, Dr. Rath and Dr. Nadhanael. So thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. It's a wonderful thing. And moreover, today also holds a very special place in our hearts, as this day marks the anniversary of the inauguration of both the Humanities building and also this Multimedia Learning Center. So happy birthday to both the building and also this building. It was on this day, on 26th of August, during the workshop, I still remember Ashok Lahiri sir, who was the finance secretary, he was here with us, Bhagwan had blessed him. So on that day, this particular building was inaugurated, and this turns out to be 2006, it's almost 18 years long that Bhagwan had given this beautiful, I don't call them as buildings, we call them as temple of learnings. Yes, we consider this as a temple. So thank you, Bhagwan, for giving this great gift to us in order to chisel the young minds of the students. Currently, the department offers programs at UG level as well as the PG programs. At UG level, we have BA Honors in Economics and BSc Honors in Economics. And at MA Economics, we have two streams, namely the Financial Economics and the Applied Economics. And we also have the post-graduation program, which is offered at PhD level. Coming to the theme, we all know the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered a historic economic downturn in India and also the world. With the fiscal contraction in over 4 decades, it was the first time it happened in 2021, India faced acute crisis to address the economic revival, job creations, and robust healthcare facilities for vaccination distribution. However, as we march in the financial year 23-24, we witness that the macroeconomic policies have been a guiding compass, ensuring a nation's steady course even amidst the turbulent times of crisis. This workshop is organized to deepen the participants' understanding of macro stabilization policies and serve as a platform for the students, the scholars, and the policymakers to discuss and dwell upon the post-pandemic measures. With these few words, I once again welcome you all to this workshop, and I sensitize the students to tap the opportunities to broaden their understanding. I also wish our distinguished speakers to have a fulfilling time at the Prasanthi campus. Once again, thank you all for wonderful opportunity for giving me to welcome you all for this workshop. With these few words, I end my talk. Thank you. Jai Sai Ram.
Thank you, sir, for your warm welcome. We now have the inaugural address by our esteemed Vice-Chancellor, Professor B. Raghavendra Prasad. Sir is an alumnus of Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. He embarked on his illustrious career in 1986 from the Indian Institute of Science, Department of Physics. During his tenure at ISE, he worked on a laser applications program, a defense project of national importance. Post this project, Sir moved to the Indian Institute of Astrophysics in 1998, where he led several complex astronomy projects such as high-resolution SSSIHL spectrograph, closed-loop adaptive optics, and multiple space-based astronomy projects. In addition to these, Sir was the principal investigator of the VELC Aditya L1 space solar mission of ISRO. He and his team delivered the primary payload visible emission line coronagraph for India's first space solar observatory, Aditya L1. The Aditya L1 mission is expected to give new insights into understanding the dynamics of the sun and help develop models for space weather prediction and several other areas of solar astronomy. Apart from these, Professor Prasad has served as a chairman and a member of numerous committees across various R&D institutions and the universities. He has scores of publications in journals of repute. He is an active contributor to the community services and has been an integral part of several initiatives by the Sri Sathya Sai Central Trust. Sir took the helm as the 12th Vice-Chancellor of Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning on June 1st, 2023. May I now request our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Sir, to deliver his inaugural address.
Om Shri Sai Ram. I offer my most prayerful salutations at the lotus feet of our divine founding Chancellor, Bhagavan Shri Sathya Sai Baba. And I don't think I have any words to express my, the heartfelt gratitude for the, the education system that he has given to all of us. And we can only try living up to his expectations and try to fulfill our own lives by trying to, walk the path of his mission and vision. So it's, a real homecoming feeling for me personally to be here after several years. And respected Chancellor, sir, the most active member of this university, even at this very young age. And I don't think there's any subject which doesn't interest him. And, he's always there to help us and guide us. And I have personally benefited from him, even from our student days. When I was studying, he was the registrar. He actually gave up his very illustrious, civil services, career and surrendered himself to the service of our Lord. And then has been spearheading various programs of the SSSIHL Central Trust since then. And even today, he's, a kind of beacon of light for us to go back and say, look, we need your help and support. And I'm sure he's one of the most energetic person when it comes to discussion on any topic for that matter, be it science or economics or be it commerce, or no matter what it is. And he's such a well-read man. And I feel it's my greatest honor to, be under his guidance at this role. And we have my administrative colleagues, Prof. IGIDR and Sanjay Sahani, and also our distinguished guests over here, Prof. Bhanumurthy, Dr. Deba Prasad Rath from RBI, and Dr. Nadhanael, and then Prof. Ashima Goyal. Let me start, and of course my colleagues at Sathya Institute of Higher Learning, when Raghavan Raju came and talked to me that I should speak something on that. Economics is the last subject I ever understand anything, in spite of being in physics. Of course, I will try, please don't mind when I express my ignorance over here. And of course, my, when I see my students over here, I feel really, really happy. The young minds over here, and waiting to absorb every word that comes out of this workshop from the experts. I personally feel that I myself was sitting there several decades ago among them, whenever there was a very interesting conference or workshop. Nice to see all of you. Of course, my first understanding of the so-called economic situation goes back to, in late 80s and early 90s. When, somewhere in the newspaper we saw that India was going to mortgage its gold to meet the, foreign exchange shortage. And we just had about, forgive me for my lack of understanding numbers, about 1.6 billion, foreign exchange reserve. And it was only sufficient for about 3 weeks of essential, imports. And that's when then the government decided to mortgage about few tons of our own gold reserves to enhance our, with IMF, of course, and then to get additional foreign exchange. And I understood that when I actually saw, when I was going to IISc near, Bangalore airport, I saw a huge truck with a, safe vault on that, and it was, covered completely by security, gun-trotting security people. Then I asked somebody, what is this? This is the gold that's being transported. I think finally it went to Bank of London or somewhere over there for mortgage. From that situation, then later on, of course, these are all, it depends on the political dispensations, their ideologies, not going into that. The real revival, as far as my understanding goes back to the great combination of, Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh, who, set forth certain set of reforms in Indian economy. And then I think we haven't looked back since then. Just to tell the young minds over here. Those were the days when, people even from IISc, those who were passed out, were struggling to find jobs. Okay, that was the situation. There were no jobs and everybody were lost. I personally remember that in IISc there was so much of unrest among students, for not getting jobs anywhere. And there's an exodus, to other countries in search of, jobs and higher education. I think later from after that, we have grown significantly and we have been continuing to grow. And of course, still, the pandemic hit us. And fortunately, we had a very good, economic advisor to Government of India, which was very, very receptive to, the kind of policy changes that need to be brought back to recover very soon from the so-called downslide in our own, economic situation. And if I remember right, somewhere the numbers I think the government paid more importance, which is very, very critical for us, on saving lives and livelihoods. I think that was very, very essential because probably the experience of Spanish flu, etc. Our policy makers were ready to, sort of save the lives. And of course, it led to a lot of disruption. There's no doubt about it. We need to sort of, a small time, short-term pain is very critical for long-term gains is what they say. I think that's the way that, we later on some of the government policies like Atmanirbhar Bharat and, PM Kisan and, various programs of the government really helped us to bounce back into the mainstream, economies of the world. And I think we can proudly say now, it's the way we have grown. We are in a very respectable position. I'm not sure we are the fifth largest economy or third largest economy, I'm not sure. But certainly I know very well that, the target is to be the topmost economy by 2047 to celebrate the 100th year of our independence. So I'm sure with all the very reputed economists over here and, the schools of economies and our own institute over here where we had very illustrious economists as faculty members over here and also several, great economists visiting here and talking to our students and, helping us continuously with the curriculum improvement. Our own students also have been doing, a great, enormous service to the country in different sectors after having graduated from here. So I wish a great success for this workshop and I compliment my colleague, Raghavendra Raju and his, junior faculty members, colleagues who have, worked very hard in trying to organize this workshop where we have very reputed economists again, sir. We are all honored, sir, to have all of you over here. And please, have a very comfortable stay over here and anything, let us know. We'll try to mitigate those discomforts. Thank you very much once again. I wish everybody the very best. Sai Ram.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring remarks. Your insights have aptly set the stage for today's proceedings. We now have a photo session. A shoot is arranged on the lawns right outside this hall. I request all the administrators, guests, faculties and students for the photo shoot and request everyone to return to this hall after the shoot for further proceedings. Sai Ram.
elders, teachers, and my dear brothers, loving Sairams and a very good morning to one and all. As part of the proceedings, it is my present duty and a privilege to introduce our first resource speaker for today, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Sir is the inaugural Vice-Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bengaluru, and Professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi. Professor Bhanumurthy finished his PhD in Economics from the Institute for Social and Economic Change, or ISEC, Bengaluru, and has rendered his expertise to various government and non-government organizations such as the Finance Ministry, RBI, Niti Aayog, Asian Development Bank, International Labour Organization, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or the UNESCAP project for Thailand, and United Nations Development Programme projects for India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and has also held visiting positions at McGill University, Montreal, and the Asian Development Bank in Manila. In recognition of his profound contributions, he was awarded the Mahalanobis Memorial Medal Award in 2014 and the V.K.R.V. Rao Prize in Social Sciences Award in 2015. Professor Bhanumurthy is a scholar of notable repute, with scores of publications of research articles, conference papers, newspaper articles, columns, and noteworthy books. It is indeed a privilege to have him here today. With this, we now welcome Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, sir, to express his thoughts on our first topic for today, Indian economy during the post-pandemic period. Professor.
Thank you. Om Shri Sairam. Honorable Chancellor, Shri Chakravarti sir, my colleague, my friends from RBI, Dr. Raju, faculty members of Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and my student friends. It's always a pleasure to come to this campus. I think I have come almost 8 or 9 times. And more specifically, I have come to the conference organized by Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. It's always a pleasure and pleasant, and when you go back, it's a really great experience every time that I have come here. And I have worked very closely with Dr. Pandit, who was the founder of the Department of Economics. And so whenever we get invitation, we'll actually, without any hesitation, we just accept and come here to be part of this whole ecosystem. So I think, thank you so much again for inviting me to this conference. This workshop is on macro stabilization, right? I think I asked who are going to be the audience, so I was told that mostly students, and I thought let me bring a little more basics to what you mean by macro stabilization, and I will try to explain to you how the macro fiscal policies, not only the post-pandemic, but also pre-pandemic. You want to understand, if it is post-pandemic, you need to understand what was the pre-pandemic kind of situation, and then how, time and again, India has been, rescued from many of the shocks, okay, that emanated both domestically as well as externally. And I think the role played by fiscal and monetary authorities this time around, I'm saying in front of my RBI friends, you should really appreciate the kind of policy that was brought by the Indian Monetary Authority, the Reserve Bank of India, and we have become a bright spot in a troubled global economy. So I think to that extent, my appreciations and congratulations to Reserve Bank of India, its team. I don't know how many of you know, I'm a big fan of RBI in Delhi. It's not easy to be an RBI fan sitting in Finance Ministry Institute. Okay, it was always a difficult task to really be not just in this place, everywhere I keep saying, we have one institute, the way we have Indian Army, right? It protects your borders, it protects security, but you have a Reserve Bank of India which gives you financial security. And day in and day out, there's so much of attack happened to the financial system, but this is the institution that we have, which is still not been affected by any other political system. So in that sense, they are immune to political system. So we are also immune to financial insecurity. So with that, let me take you through some of the points that I have. So basically, I would like to explain why India has become a bright spot in a troubled global economy with a simple things. I don't want to complicate. Even economists are known for complicating simple things, right? But I would like to make it a little more simple I'll explain what exactly this meant by macro stabilization, and then I'll come to what exactly we have done. Even in 2008 global financial crisis, we were not affected. But it was because of the post-global financial crisis policies we got affected in 2011-12, and again I'll show you what kind of policies led to that, and I'll try to contrast between the global financial crisis and COVID-19. So in what made the difference between two episodes and why we escaped from the post-COVID shocks compared to why we got into the post-global financial crisis shocks. So little bit about pre-pandemic policies, and then I'll talk about macro policies in the post-pandemic and the current recovery and also the current global recession that we are facing right now. And we all know that India is actually recovering, right? I mean, everybody thinks that India is recovering, and I'm sure all of you know that last year we had 7.2% GDP growth. Now this year RBI predicts 6.5%. Next year again we'll be somewhere close to 6.5 or 7%. So if you look at this, for the last 3 years, and last year, current year, the next year, we will be the fastest growing large economy in the world. Okay, so that is the tag that we have. So, and whether it's going to be structural, the kind of recovery that we are seeing right now. Now, if you want to understand whether we are recovering or not, you have to understand what is happening to other countries, right? You should understand what's happening to other countries, particularly the advanced countries. Now, advanced countries are actually in deep slowdown. Maybe we cannot use the word recession, but I think there is a slowdown that seems to be happening. But if you look at some of the big countries like Germany and UK, I think they're already declared as official recession kind of situation. So are there more bumps ahead for us? I think these are things that I thought let me talk about. What are the policies, fiscal policies in the medium term that we need? And I'll just discuss what are the long-term issues going forward. So if you want to understand fiscal and monetary policies, this is the simple basic national income identity. And if you look at NSO press releases, you have two types of GDP estimation, right? There is one GDP at market price, and there is something called GVA at basic price, okay? Now, this is a Keynesian identity. I'm sure all of students are from economics. Yeah? So this is a simple national income identity, like you have a demand side estimation where Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, and we usually estimate from the nominal GDP side. So you have a demand like from the household, from government, as well as the external demand, that exports minus import. So when there is a demand, and you know what happened in the COVID period, there was a substantial decline in the aggregate demand. That's what aggregate demand function. Now you know that the aggregate demand has declined drastically because of the COVID-19. Now what is the policy that you need to revive the aggregate demand, right? We always talked about you have to create stimulus. You have to provide stimulus to the economy so that the aggregate demand will increase. Now if you look at that particular identity, there are only two places where the fiscal policy can play, right? The fiscal policy either spends or taxes, right? They're going to, if you have seen the budget document, you have a tax program or the expenditure program in the fiscal policy. Okay. Now, if you look at this particular equation, there are two places where the expenditure government can do, that is a G component, that is the government consumption expenditure, or the IPU, that is a public investment, or the capital expenditure that we say in the budget document, what we say is that capital expenditure and the revenue expenditure, right? These are the two things that they can do. Now, if you see, either way, if you increase the G component or IPU component, your aggregate demand will go up, right? Isn't it? So, now what the government has done, they have increased the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, right? 30 lakh crore or something like that. Now, some part of it actually is going to the G component, some part is going to the large part of the RBI component in the Atmanirbhar Bharat package was actually going for public investment incentives. So, the aggregate demand can be increased either by G or by IPU or by both, isn't it? Now, what happens? Now, you have this aggregate demand equation. When there is aggregate demand equation, what is that we need to have in the economy? Aggregate demand means what is next? Supply. So, supply is basically you have aggregate supply where you have agriculture, industry and services. When you have demand, we have money in your pocket, either you demand your agriculture product or industry or services. So, this is a supply side equation where your total supply, aggregate supply will be equal to agricultural output, industrial output and service output, right? Aggregate demand and aggregate supply. This is largely estimated from the real side, real GDP side kind of thing. Now, when there is an aggregate demand and the aggregate supply, then what is that outcome of that? Demand supply interaction? Equilibrium. What is that equilibrium? Price, right? So, what is the aggregate price in Indian economy that we use? Consumer price index. So, if you look at the arithmetic, if you divide the YD by YS, okay, you divide the YD by YS, you will get the GDP deflator, okay. YD by YS, you will get a GDP deflator, you can see here. Now, we have aggregate GDP deflator, which is, proxied by CPI or WPI, you have the economy-wide prices. Now, if you take the simple log of this and take the growth rate, you will get this simple identity where the demand side, growth rate of demand side output should be equal to growth rate of supply side output plus growth rate of prices, which is inflation. Okay. So, the nominal GDP growth should be equal to real GDP growth plus inflation. Is that okay? Now, if the aggregate demand declines, if the fiscal policy increases any of these components, the nominal GDP growth will increase. Am I right? Now, if there is an increase in that aggregate demand, if the aggregate supply also increases, so then aggregate supply will increase, then there will be no impact on the inflation. For example, if nominal GDP growth increases by 5% and aggregate supply also increases by 5%, then there is no impact on inflation. Okay? I'll just give an example. If the nominal GDP growth is 10%, if the RBI manages the inflation as 4%, the real GDP will be 6%. This is very simple. Okay? Now, and this is the macro stabilization that we are talking about. This is the simple identity where the increase in nominal GDP growth should be distributed between real GDP growth and inflation. Okay? That is what is called a macro stabilization. Nothing much more than that. Okay? Now, for example, the aggregate GDP, aggregate demand is increased by G, like if the government decides to increase the aggregate demand by increasing the consumption expenditure. Like for example, if the government decides to increase my salary, so the G component will increase, aggregate demand will increase, and nominal GDP growth also will increase. But if it doesn't compensate it by increase in real GDP, then whatever increase in my salary lead to inflation. Very simple. Now, on the other hand, if the government decides to increase capital expenditure, that is IPU component. If they are increasing IPU means they have to invest either in the agriculture sector or industry or services, right? Isn't it? They are investing. Investing means it has to invest in the economic activity either in agriculture or industry and services. So, the increase in IPU, that means increase in nominal GDP growth, if it leads to increase in aggregate supply also, then there is no impact on inflation. So I am trying to bring the distinction between the two activities of the government, that is revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure. Okay? If the government decides to go for revenue expenditure, I am saying that because of this, if there is no increase in the aggregate output, any increase in the revenue expenditure will lead to increase in the nominal demand, but it doesn't lead to increase in real supply that lead to inflation. Is that okay up to here? So here the fiscal policy always tries to maximize nominal GDP for a simple reason. If there is an increase in nominal GDP growth, that will lead to increase in tax revenue. Tax revenues is just a function of nominal GDP. So it always tries to maximize nominal GDP growth. Okay? Now what happens if the government decides to go for G component, that they increase the G component, that lead to nominal GDP growth, but at the same time lead to inflation? Then what happens? Then the monetary policy come in. The monetary policy tries to minimize this inflation by increasing the interest rate. So when there is an increase in the interest rate, what will happen to IPV component? Decline, right? So when the IPV component declines, then the nominal demand will, nominal GDP growth also will come down. Are you getting the mechanism? So increasing the G component lead to increase in inflation, okay? And that lead to increase in the interest rate, and that will lead to crowding out of private investment. So the concept of crowding out comes in. Increase in G component will lead to crowd out of private investment through inflation interest rate channel. Okay. On the other hand, if the government decides to go for capital expenditure, there is no impact on inflation, right? The increase in aggregate demand will lead to increase in the investment, because there is an increase in public investment in agriculture or industry and services, then it will attract more private investment. So there is a positive relationship between these two variables, that is government capital expenditure and private investment, and there is a negative relation between G and IPV component. So that if the fiscal policy of stimulating the economy by G component lead to crowding out of private investment because it becomes inflationary, and the fiscal policy of increasing the capital expenditure component lead to crowding in impact on the private investment. Okay, so if this is the simple identity. Okay, this particular component, the fiscal policy always tries to maximize, because they need to generate more tax revenue. In fact, the tax revenue is just a simple function of nominal GDP growth plus a buoyancy, that tax buoyancy that we talk. On the other hand, the central bank, the monetary policy, tries to minimize this. We always have the problem of excess inflation, now always tries to minimize the inflation. So actually, the real GDP growth is the byproduct of the fiscal and monetary policies. Actually, nobody targets this. Okay? Now, the way we manage the fiscal and monetary policies will result in the real GDP growth, which is just a byproduct of the interaction between the fiscal and monetary policy. Is that okay? Up to here? Now, I think yesterday somebody was talking about stagnation. In fact, India is going to get into some kind of stagnationary condition, though, so I put this particular identity where the stagnation is nothing but, stagflation. Stagflation nothing but stagnation plus inflation. Stagnation in the real GDP growth, but at the same time you have an inflationary condition. So, so the real GDP growth is supposed to be flat, while there is a increased inflation. That's what the situation where we can get into, stagflationary kind of condition. So now what happened in the the global financial crisis? As I said, I started by saying India was not really got affected by global financial crisis, but because of the post-global financial crisis policy that led to inflationary pressure. And what happened in 2008 and 2009, because of the election year also, that time, we had the 2009 election, and in the name of the global financial crisis, the government of India went for very, very excessive fiscal stimulus. Okay, In fact, the fiscal deficit led almost to 6% for the central government, but if you add the central plus state, it was somewhere close to 11 to 12%. And large part of the stimulus was given through the G component. You would have seen the loan waiver scheme, and there are so many other schemes that brought in that time where it led to excessive fiscal stimulus now, and it led to, although it led to increase in the aggregate demand. The aggregate demand, I'll tell you, the nominal GDP growth was somewhere close to 18 to 20%. 18 to 20% of nominal GDP growth, 6% or 7% real GDP growth, the rest went to inflation. So we had a 2 years double-digit inflation post-global financial crisis because of the excessive fiscal stimulus that was created. It was not necessary at that point of time. And that's what it led to, so much of instability in the macroeconomy, and we got into the current account deficit going to 6.6%, and we all seen that what happened in 2013. There was almost like a run on the forex market, and the temper tantrum actually triggered the huge instability in the financial market. Okay, this time around, in the post-global financial crisis, what India has done is completely opposite of what we have done in the post-global financial crisis. I'm sure you must be reading newspapers in the last 3 years. If you look at the last 3 years budget, despite so much pressure from economists like us, where we were saying that you have to transfer a lot of money to people and all those things, government has actually gone for a capital expenditure strategy. The CapEx strategy that right now, you can see that if you look at the fiscal deficit, right now the CapEx expenditure is almost, 60% of fiscal deficit. I think it is 3.5% capital expenditure against 5.9 fiscal deficit, right? So you have somewhere close to 60% of expenditure on the fiscal deficit is actually going for CapEx, that is IPU, the public investment component. Now we have a situation where except for the last month where the inflation went to 7+, but otherwise we are managing within the less than 6% for almost 5-6 months. And I think it all because of the kind of a strategy that we followed, completely different strategy that we followed compared to the post-global financial crisis. Now intrinsically there is another thing that's happening here. Now, as I said, if you increase in GDP, I mean if you increase the G, we said that it will also increase the aggregate demand, but there is a concept of fiscal multiplier. Okay. Now fiscal multiplier is nothing but the change in output divided by change in the expenditure. Okay. If you are increasing the expenditure by 100 rupees, if you are getting 100 rupees worth of output, then we say the multiplier is 1. Okay. If it is you are getting less than 100 rupees worth of output, then we say the fiscal multiplier is less than 1. If it is more than 100, you will get more than 1. So if you look at this, the fiscal multiplier for G component, that is revenue expenditure multiplier, we found it as a less than 1. Now somebody can ask me what is happening to the rest of the money, right? If the economy is the government pumps in 100 rupees to the economy, you are getting the return of less than 100 rupees. Then what is happening to the rest of that? Can anybody tell me in this particular equation? So you see, this is a negative. That means there is 100 rupees worth of demand is been created in the economy, but 100 rupees worth of output is not been created. Then what do? You import. If you are not satisfied by the domestic supply, you will import from the economy. I mean outside the economy. That's why it's called leakage. This is a leakage from the system. So whatever the G component that you are increasing, if it is not being supported by the domestic supply, you look for the supply from the international economy. That's a leakage from the system. You understand? So if you are increasing the G component, either it is crowding out private investment or leading to leakage in the system. Okay? You understand now? So the quality of expenditure matters very much when it comes to fiscal policy. So we are saying the capital expenditure is more superior compared to revenue expenditure if you are targeting higher GDP growth. You might increase this G component for various other reasons. But don't say that you are increasing the GDP G component for enhancing output growth. How much time I have, Raj? Huh? No, it's already 10 minutes or what? Okay, fine. Yeah. Otherwise, I'll keep talking. Okay. So, now for this capital expenditure, we estimated a multiplier of 2.45. What it means, if I'm spending 1 rupee, I'm surprised even RBI got the same number, 2.45. So we are almost coincided with in the second digit, that 2.45. My numbers were little earlier, 2012 numbers. RBI produced in somewhere in 2020, the same number, 2.45 is the capex multiplier. That means if I'm spending 1 rupee on the capital expenditure, I'm getting a return of 2.45 times. And that is called impact multiplier. But if you are investing, for example, you are investing on the roads, the return is not limited to only 1 year, right? You will get for little more than 1 year. So we have found that the cumulative multiplier is somewhere close to 4.6. That is, today if I am spending 1 rupee, I will get a return of 2.45 rupees in the current year, but at the same time, for the same rupee, I will get almost 4.6 rupees over a period of 6 years. I think that's what we estimated. You know, the next zero returns comes in the capital expenditure only after 7th year. Until then, you start getting positive return. Okay, that is what is called cumulative multiplier. So these numbers actually helped heavily in the last 3 years, where the central government started adopting the capex strategy. Right now, this particular year, central government is spending something like 10.5 lakh crore for capital expenditure, and in addition to that, they are providing, I think, 1 lakh crore or 2 lakh crore to the states. So you will see somewhere close to 11 to 12 lakh crore being invested in the current year because of the expected return from IPU is much larger than the return from the G component. So this is the crux of the story, where we have followed a different strategy post-COVID compared to what we followed in the post-global financial crisis. Now, and I know all of you know the G20 and all happening now. Somebody is going to speak, I think, today, tomorrow. The G20 all came after the global financial crisis, but unfortunately, out of the G20, only India has done differently this time. Okay? It's only India that has done very differently compared to all the rest of 18 countries. Of course, there's one European Union. This time we have done very differently. And now if you compare the GDP growths of India with the rest of the G20 countries, we are very, very far away from them. I'm telling you, as I told you, there are some countries, the big countries actually in recession. Now, there is no other country right now growing at anything more than 3 to 4% among the G20 countries. And the reason is we have shifted the strategy from G to IPU component. And this is not new for us. This is the crux of the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. Now, I have done this for last 3 finance commissions. I am fed up to explain to everybody that the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act actually speaks about the philosophy of that Fiscal Responsible Budget Management Act is shifting the expenditure from G to IPU, for a simple reason that IPU is more superior and more stabilizing than the G component. In fact, by doing that shifting from G to IPU, you get more resources for increasing your G component. The strategy, right now what happens is the politics is different, we economists are different, right? The politicians speak about 5 guarantees. I am coming from Karnataka where there's more of 5 guarantee schemes are going on. The strategy is to increase this and get more votes. But the strategy should be to increase this, get more jobs and get more votes. That is little more stabilizing than going for this guarantee schemes and all those things. Now, this is exactly the crux of the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. So, what it says that your fiscal deficit should be equal to 3%. Okay? Now, the revenue deficit should be equal to 0%. Now, what is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is nothing but revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure minus total revenue, that tax revenues and non-tax revenues together. Now, what is revenue deficit? It basically G minus TR. So, if you look at this particular equation, fiscal deficit is nothing but the revenue deficit plus capital expenditure. When they say the fiscal deficit should be 3% and revenue deficit should be equal to 0%, intrinsically they are saying the capex should be equal to 3%. Okay? Now, right now, your fiscal deficit is 5.9%. Revenue deficit is something like 3.6%, something like that. Now, what is the difference between 5.9 and 3.6? 2.3. Now, what they are saying is you bring down the fiscal deficit from 5.9 to 3%, revenue deficit from 3.5 to 0%. Then what's happening to capital expenditure? It is increasing from 2.3 to 3%. So basically, there is a misconception in this country. FRB is nothing but a expenditure compression mechanism. But it is not an expenditure compression mechanism. It is an expenditure switching mechanism. I mean, I am coming from my NIPFP where most of the faculty think that FRBM is an expenditure compression mechanism. Now, I say that, I have been working on this FRB for last 3 finance commissions. I know the whole mechanism. And I am saying it is not expenditure compression, it is an expenditure switching. It has taken the budget of 2021 where government followed this capex strategy. Until then, very difficult for me to convince even my own faculty members. So the point I am trying to say is that ultimately, I am just bringing some of the concepts here. Ultimately, we need to, one is the macro stabilization where you balance all these 3 variables in the short run, but I think in the long run for macro stabilization, I think the public debt is one thing becomes a very, very important variable. Okay, public debt is nothing but the you and me, whatever is, need to pay to this economy, not maybe next generation also, or next to next generation also. That is the public debt that we owe to this country. Right now it has gone up to 90%, 89% I think in the last number that says, basically public debt to GDP ratio is nothing but, I'm sure all of you know the stock and flow variable, right? The public debt is a stock, fiscal deficit is a flow variable. GDP is what? Huh? Stock? Flow? Stock or flow? Stock flow. Huh? How many people think it's a stock and how many things for flow? How many things it neither? GDP is what? Flow. Are you sure? So be clear. GDP is a again flow variable. Okay? So public debt is a stock variable. There are only 2 major stock variables. One is the public debt. Of course, there is a capital stock also. There is a money stock. Money supply, we say, no? Money is also stock. So public debt basically, you will see the public debt, the current period will be equal to public debt in previous period plus the addition to the fiscal deficit that current year that we have. So if you look at the FRBM, again, a lot of people think that FRBM Act is only these 2 variables. But for me, more than this, there is an important variable in the FRBM, that is the public debt to GDP ratio. Okay? Public debt to GDP ratio should be brought down to 60%. That's what the 15th Finance Commission has said. Right now it is close to 90%. Again, there are so many numbers. You know, there are at least 3 numbers, same government produces public debt to GDP ratio, 3 numbers. But I believe in RBI, so I take RBI numbers. Okay, it's called outstanding liabilities, right? So outstanding liabilities is somewhere close to 89%. Now it should be brought down to 60% of GDP. Imagine, it has to be brought down to 60% of GDP. If you want to bring down the public debt to 60% of GDP, there is no option for you other than adopting this strategy. Bringing the fiscal deficit to 3%, revenue deficit to 0%. Otherwise, there is no option for you to bring the public debt to GDP ratio. So again, comes back to a simple concept of multiplier. What is public debt to GDP ratio? There is a numerator, there is a denominator. When will this ratio come down? For example, there is a ratio A by B. When will the ratio come down? That's how it is, right? It has to move in opposite direction. Now, if you add public debt by increasing the G component, I said again 100 rupees and less than 100 rupees. If I am adding the public debt by 100 rupees, that is numerator is added by 100 rupees, the denominator is added only less than 100 rupees, then what will happen to ratio? Huh? A plus 100 divided by B plus 90. What happens to ratio? Increases. If other way around, A plus 100 by A plus 240, B plus 245, what will happen? So if you don't follow this strategy, there is no way public debt to GDP ratio come down. The increase in numerator should be less than the increase in the denominator, then only your public debt to GDP ratio will come down. Since it's a stock variable, it will keep on increasing, both numerator will keep on increasing in levels. But as a ratio, if it has to come down, it will come down only, the numerator has to increase less than the increase in the denominator. So for that also, you need to have this strategy where fiscal deficit will be equal to 3%. In fact, many people think that this has been given by some Maastricht treaty and all, because they don't want to give credit to RBI. It has come from Rangarajan Committee of 12th Finance Commission. It very clearly says that 3% is the only resource available for the private sector. Now, if you want to give, more resources to private sector, you have to reduce your borrowing program. Otherwise, there is no option left. There is a 9% household financial savings. 3% will go to the central government, 3% will go to state governments, and the less 3% will go to private sector. Instead, if you are borrowing 8% from the market, what is left for the private sector? So that is the whole mechanism. But again, if you look at some popular writing, they say it has come from Maastricht Treaty and all. That's not true actually. So, finally, the reason why we have done differently is that because of our understanding about the fiscal multiplier, and that led to better outcomes, and that's the reason why the international financial institutions say that India is a bright spot in the troubled global economy. Okay, I'm sure all of you read newspaper, right? But generally, I assume, as an economist, we assume that students don't read newspaper. Am I right or not? I am right, I think, right? That you don't read newspaper. Not in mobiles. Mobile में तो कुछ नहीं आता है. इतना ही news आता है. So I have a bad habit of telling everywhere that please read newspaper. Okay? So don't mistake me, but that's my bad habit. So I just run through these slides. So whatever I'm going to explain right now, please remember my first slide where that I try to explain that aggregate demand, aggregate supply, nominal GDP growth should be equal to real GDP growth plus inflation. That distribution between real GDP and inflation ensures your macro stabilization. That's a simple thing. Okay? If you manage that, even the current account deficit, that leakage that I talked about, even that will be minimum. Okay? So, the fiscal policy pre-COVID, I mean, I have my own issues with all those things, but public finances post 14th Finance Commission, I don't know how many of you know, there is a Finance Commission where that ensure the distribution of tax collection between the center and states that happens once in 5 years. So till now we had 15 finance commissions. So now I think we are going to see the 16th finance commission that is going to be formed, and that ensures, the distribution of the tax revenues. The FRBM, whatever the 14th finance commission, again, I don't want to get into these technical terms, but I have taken a position even before the COVID-19. There was a slowdown in 18, 19, 19, 20, there was a slowdown. And I have said, can that explain by the 14th Finance Commission recommendation, okay, where they allowed more resources to the states, and I have taken the rescue of RBI study that time. I was doing some work for the 15th Finance Commission. I found that larger devolution to the states, you may have many reasons for increasing resources to the state governments, okay. There could be many number of reasons, but at the same time, assuming that it will also lead to higher GDP growth and also lead to lower public debt to GDP ratio was inconsistent. Okay, so I did that study, but then around that time I saw this study by RBI where it shows the multiplier size for the state government is lower than the size of the multiplier of the central government. So if you are shifting from central government to some resources which is having a higher multiplier to the state government which is having a lower multiplier, obviously you will get a lower GDP growth. Okay, so in fact I have a study that said, the 15th Finance Commission said that larger devolution to states have indeed led to lower GDP growth. Okay, so this is the kind of policy that we had pre-COVID, and again there was, after that 14th Finance Commission, there was the FRBM committee. Again, they brought in some more changes, and I thought it has actually created more problem than solution for the 14th Finance Commission outcomes. And as I said, intrinsically the size of multiplier for states found to be lower than that of a center. Okay. But more problems started with the Finance Bill 2018. Even today, it is not been rectified. What they did was, they removed this target. So in the FRBM Act, there is a 3%, 0%, and the public debt to GDP ratio of 60%. Now, in the FRBM, that Amendment Act, they removed this target of 0%. That means the government need not stick to the revenue neutral policy. So what happens is, there is a high chance, even if the government is reducing the fiscal deficit to 3%, all the 3% can actually go for revenue deficit, not necessarily for the capital expenditure. Okay, this again, for people to realize that this happened, it took 1 year. Okay, that they have done it on April 1st, 2018, and it took, April 1st means you all know what it is. So on April 1st, they put that, the finance bill and said that now onward there is no target of revenue deficit. But they retain the target for the state government. State government have to follow that 3%, 0% target, but central government need not. They can be reckless, right? State governments have to control their expenditure. So the 2018-19 slowdown, in fact, I was trying to explain by all these fiscal policy changes, and it is still there in the 15th Finance Commission website, where I said that could be one reason why the economy is slowing. So this is again, I already explained, right? There's a confusion between expenditure compression versus expenditure switching, and in fact, all those things have led to many other macro instability, like savings actually fell down from 37.8% to 30%. And see, this is something, fiscal monetary coordination I talked about, right? We have a situation where we have a flexible inflation targeting. That's what FIT we say, FIT. But we have an unfit fiscal targeting, where we say that there is no need of our revenue deficit, right? And it's only 3%. There is a point estimate, 3% fiscal deficit you have to achieve. But it comes to inflation, there is a range of 2 to 6%, right? So we have been arguing that if you are not able to achieve this 3% target, why can't we have a flexible fiscal deficit targeting? In fact, we submitted to NK Singh committee also, And they said that if you have a flexible fiscal deficit targeting, you always hit the higher range. Now even RBI hits the higher range all the time, 5 to 6%. So otherwise, but what happens is people look at this fiscal deficit very carefully, right? And inflation, okay, 2 to 6% TK chalega. In fact, the fiscal deficit, it becomes 3.1%, market will keep talking about it. There are so many people talking, government has failed in achieving the fiscal deficit target of 3%. It led to 3.1% fiscal deficit. All those things will come into that. What we argued around that COVID time was that we need to have a coordination between the fiscal and monetary authorities, and it was not there before the COVID-19. But I think during COVID-19, you would have seen RBI governor much more than the finance minister, right? I'm sure at that time you must be watching TV at least. No? Newspapers were banned, but TV we were seeing. Most of the time you would have seen RBI governor on the TV. Even before, I think March 25th, he started coming to TV. So he came at least 12 times after that. So with so many measures and so many short-term measures, so which is a good thing. I mean, that is another shift that happened. In 2011-12, we had always seen finance minister. Now, post-COVID, we have seen more of RBI governor. So that itself is a shift where we are seeing that monetary authority playing a major role. But after that, you have seen finance minister many times as part of that Atmanirbhar Bharat package. Now that 30 lakh crore, out of 30 lakh crore, 20 lakh crore is actually what RBI has done. Okay, so you have the rest, 10 lakh crore is here and there, National Food Security Act, PM Kisan, this, that they have done, so 10 lakh crore. Otherwise, 2/3 of the policies have actually been done even before the finance minister. But the best part is that there was the much better coordination between the fiscal and monetary authority. Unlike in the global financial crisis, I don't know how many of you know RBI governors. You want to understand RBI, you need the former RBI governor's books. Who moved my interest rate, ek bolega. Then somebody will say that I am so and so, I do what I want to do. Right? Somebody will say I do what I don't want to do. So all those things, the books, the title itself will give you the impression of the tension between, and I'm not joking, but you need to understand how the tension between the fiscal and monetary authority, okay, which is very important, has actually helped Indian economy over a period of last 30 years. I don't know before 30 years, because post-90s, it was absolutely professional between the fiscal and monetary authority. In fact, I keep telling RBI people, one of the best publication came from RBI was in 2012, Fiscal Monetary Coordination. You will not see that kind of a books from any other central bank. I must tell you that. So this time, in fact, there was a game of chicken, all those things were there. In fact, I was there in the PPT, but I dropped it. I don't want to do that here. But it's a very nice summary of whenever there is a tension in the RBI, right? They will not talk. They will only produce an article. Okay? You see, the recently also, Monetary Policy Committee, that inflation targeting, revising the inflation targeting framework. So many people have written so many things here and there. I mean, everybody wrote, criticized, all those things. What RBI did? They report on finance, currency and finance. After that, no economist spoke. I'll tell you one thing, right now in India, only institution who continuously do research is RBI. They are very dynamic, very up to date, and in fact, they will, if you ask them, they will criticize RBI. That's a different issue. After today is holiday, right? You can criticize. They say after 5:30 they can speak whatever they want. But outsiders, I am telling, I mean, your research is very well respected, and I hope that institution will stay like that only for long. Okay. So now this is about the current context. I already explained 7.2%. We are predicting 6.5% for the current year. Only thing that's happening in the fiscal situation is actually deteriorating. I think I'm in Andhra Pradesh, right? I should not talk now. So we had historically the three states, Kerala, Rajasthan, not Kerala, Kerala, West Bengal, Punjab. So bad apples in the states. Now there are two states added, Andhra, Telangana, then Rajasthan. So, you know, it's spreading actually. The disease is actually spreading. You know, what's happening in, now I don't know if Karnataka adds into that. Right now they are okay, but my fear is, this is where my fear is when it comes to 14th Finance Commission. The assumption that, I mean, they say, Constitution says that Finance Commission should have equal trust on all the states and all those things, but how can you have equal trust on all the states? Okay, I mean, Commission can have, I cannot have. So if you look at the way the states are deteriorating one by one, now come the general elections or now the state elections, you will see even the old pension system. I think there's so much of clamor for bringing back that old pension system, which was, you know, for somehow we managed in 2004. I am talking, I have every right to talk because I am not under pension. So I still oppose the old pension system. You know, but there's every manifesto talks about bringing old pension system. Now, it's actually deteriorating so badly that I'm sure if you look at some of the yields for the market, I mean the yields from the market for the state borrowing, you will see some of the states have been getting punished. There's no way you bring down that public debt to GDP ratio and if you don't really stick to that original FRBM Act. So both unions and states invoked escape clause. You know, when they do something, no, you also put that clause, okay, you can escape, there's some condition like this or like that. So they create a clause for escaping. So now they have escaped for 2 years, now I don't know, third year, they may be escaping for, until they don't amend that 2008 finance bill, they'll keep escaping, okay. So, I already told about 5.9%, in fact, general government, that is central and state together, it is still 10%. You know, for the past 3 years, the fiscal deficit is about 10%. In fact, somebody argues that India has not given fiscal stimulus. I say this number. For the past 3 years, India has given a stimulus of more than 30% of GDP. You have to add up, right? First year, second year, third year, if you add, it will be somewhere close to 36% of GDP has been given as a fiscal stimulus. Okay? Now you remove that 9%, that 3% target. Imagine how much you will be giving additional stimulus that have been given. And thankfully, some of the stimulus actually gone for that IPU component, and I think that's the reason we are still better. And you want to understand how we are better, even United States, which were supposed to achieve the target inflation of 1.5, 2%. They had almost 10% inflation for so long. Imagine, United States, and there are other countries, UK, double digit, Germany, double digit. This time, this is the only time we escaped becoming, even we have not crossed 7.4% inflation except for this month. We have not crossed that. Again, because of the fiscal policy strategy that we have. A concern is the public debt, as I told you, it's right now at 90%. The major concern is on the global developments and RBI governor, I think. See, one thing, please read the speeches of RBI governor regularly, okay? It will give you much more. By the way, I also want to compliment RBI bringing the state of the economy, state of the Indian economy as part of every monthly bulletin. Okay? There's also one more department brings it, nobody reads. Am I right? But you look at that RBI bulletin, I'm sure you are getting regularly RBI bulletin. Yeah. Now, you have a person, please take his help. You should be in the mailing list where you should get all the documents, regular documents to the department. So if you look at the RBI bulletin, the first chapter is on the state of the economy. State of the Indian economy, I think. State of the Indian economy. So nicely, very neatly, without any shouting, without any criticism, they write very neatly, very objectively what is exactly happening in the Indian economy. Anybody preparing for civil service, please read that. If you want to write any competitive exams, just read that chapter of any of the previous month, you are fine. Okay? So in one of the speeches he made, we are in a situation where the whole world is tied up with the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I think this is a very important aspect, and it continues to be like this. Okay? You must have seen last 3-4 days what all happened, right? Apart from Chandrayaan 3, but there are many other negative news around. I don't know whether you have seen. G20 happening next month. Again, there should be some discussion on the G20 here. We are going to see a huge change in the way G20 events have been made, not just events, the outcomes. I think we are going to look at a permanent change in the way G20 deliberations are going to happen, and I think India contributed extremely well in many of the aspects. The women development is one thing, women-led development is one of the things that is part of the, and lifestyle for environment, as Swami used to talk about it. Lifestyle for environment is becoming a movement and is going to be part of the G20 for coming years also. So we are in this kind of situation, and I think the impact of COVID response policies appear to have led to global price pressures. As I told you, all the G19 countries or G18 countries have followed the concept of G, because they are part of the G component. They also increase only the G component more, led to larger inflation, and they don't have a concept of public investment. I don't know what the kind of budget classification that they have, but large part of the stimulus was actually given as doles, right? Cash transfers. They thought that they need to increase the demand and revive that aggregate demand, and that led to large inflationary pressure. And added to that, we have that Ukraine-Russia war, and I think if you look at most of the OECD countries, they're under recession. I already told you about Germany, even France getting closer to that, and how India, see, we cannot, if the global big countries are slowing down, we cannot really grow at our potential. Our potential, in my view, is that we should be somewhere close to 7% to 8%. Okay, it's a dynamic concept, but right now, given the current level of investment of 35% or so, you should be growing somewhere at 7.5 to 8%. But we are still growing only at 6.5%. Again, remember my first equation, where the X component, right? The export component is one thing which is function of the advanced countries. Okay, if advanced countries don't grow, our exports will come down, and I think that particular component comes down, so will be somewhere 1.5% to 2% impact will be on the overall GDP growth. Now China is slowing down, right? 3.3% or so. You know which country gets affected more because of slowdown in China? Huh? Which country? United States. If China is slowing down, means United States is affected. Now United States is jittery now. For the first time, they brought a policy of banning investments in China now. Imagine a market economy or a capitalist economy where there is no public investment happens. They're banning investments, private investments in United States, private investments in China. You know, that is the extent of linkage that we have. So the X component is very important component for India also. And I think any slowdown in the advanced countries will have its repercussions on India's export. So that's the reason we are expected to grow at 6 to 6.5%. So there was some discussion about stagflation. I already told why India become bright spot. So I already discussed about prudent monetary policies with supporting fiscal, focus on capital expenditure. I already talked about both at the center as well as state. In fact, in some of the writings recently, I'm saying, even in the G20 deliberations, I said, one of the things that India can give to G20 in the next coming G20 summit is a framework of fiscal monetary coordination. I said fiscal monetary coordination is a public good. Okay. Now that has to be part of the macro stabilization framework that G20 is actually talking about. And then, as I said, have they led to inflation pressures? In fact, in India, it has not. But if you look at other countries, you know, some of the countries, the central bank governors were forced to, you know, reduce interest rates and all those things happened. So, yeah. So, so that fiscal monetary coordination should become part of the G20 deliberations. How qualitatively different is the domestic policies compared to policies in advanced countries? Again, I have explained to you. I already explained the lessons from 2008 crisis. We have learned a much better lesson than what other countries have done. But the revival that we have currently, whether it will continue, we are looking at active fiscal policies, both center and states. I think states need to be the front line of defense in my view, but at the same time they need to understand where to spend, what to spend. I think that's more important. You cannot simply come with some 5 guarantee, 10 guarantee, 20 guarantee. That's not the way it can cripple the state for next whole generation. I think that's very important. Continuation of incentive structure for capex states. I think they have done it recently and maybe next year also. And this I have been arguing for many years now. We need to revert back to the original FRBM Act of 2003. That means that amendment that were done in 2018 has to be addressed, and I think that should be the focus. I'm hoping at least the 16th Finance Commission will do something. Reprioritization and calibrating that whole government expenditures, I think that's something that we need. Look at the unspent balances. There are so many, this is something that, again, one of the aspects of the fiscal policy. You know, I don't know, you should do a study on, I think they have done another fantastic report on urban local bodies. That is the first of its kind on urban local bodies. And I think the similar study should happen on the rural local bodies. And my own hunch is that there's so much of unspent balance at the rural local bodies post 13th Finance Commission. There's so much of money getting accumulated and not being spent. So I think that's something that we need to look at. Fiscal stimulus through temporary reduction in tax rates is another thing that one can do. If at all next year, if the global economy goes much more worst, I think you need to look at tax policies much more than the expenditure policies. In terms of tax policies are reversible, okay? You can revert, you know, if you increase the GST from 18 to 24 or 26, you can always revert back to 18 whenever, you know, other way around, sorry. If you are reducing the tax rate from 24 to 18, again, you can always revert back when the economy becomes normal. So that policies are much more easier than if they give me money, I will not give back money to the government, right? You know, the cash transfer policies will not really help if you want to really revert. And I think most importantly, the savings is something that we need to focus more. I think compared to advanced countries, we are one of the countries which heavily depend on the savings. Okay. Now if you look at the public debt to GDP ratio, even 90% doesn't look scary because most of the public debt is being financed by the domestic savers. Okay. On the other hand, if you imagine your investments our consumption is financed by outside countries, they can ask you anytime, right? This is what happened in Sri Lanka. If you want to understand how Sri Lanka doomed and how we are not doomed even in 1991, because our debt was largely financed by the domestic savers. So I think we need to focus a little more on domestic savings. Right now, some of the banking sector policies actually anti-saving policies, some of them. One major thing is that bringing down the number of public sector banks to 3 itself is a negative policy for savings in the economy. So I have my own view on that. I think we need more public sector banks, not less. So anyway, that's something. Way forward, I mean, I have already spoken about all these things. One of the things I said is reverting back to the original FRBM Act. I think that I don't think there is, in fact, I did a study for the 15th Finance Commission. There's a lot of discussion about 5 trillion, 10 trillion, 20, 30, all those things, numbers are coming. Now, if you want to achieve that, what is that you need to do? It's not an Excel-based calculation. You grow at 8%, you will get 5. So that is what Excel-based calculations. Now, what is important is what needs to be done to reach that 8%. So one of the easy way for us to do is reverting back to the original FRBM. In fact, we have done that in 2007-8. So we can always do it again. I think that's one sure shot of becoming a 5 trillion economy by 25-26. So that simulation that I have done, and as Honorable Vice-Chancellor was talking about, by 2047 you have to become Amrit Kal, right? You have to become advanced country, one of the advanced country, not in terms of GDP, but I think in terms of the per capita GDP. So for that, what we need to do, again, it is not Excel-based calculation. It has to be backed by some policy suggestions, and what we believe is that a better fiscal monetary coordination certainly will lead India to whatever the objective that we are talking about. With some support from the external environment, I think we can grow at 7.5% to 8%. I believe 8% is India's potential GDP growth. Okay, so let me stop here, and thank you so much for your patiently hearing, and if there's any query, I'll be happy to.
Distribution of fiscal stimulus by the government in the form of manufacturing sector, services sector, and agriculture sector. Since India directly shifted from agriculture to services sector, now it's realization is going on for manufacturing sector. So what are your views on distribution like this?
So that is basically about the structure of the economy. See, you need to, what is the, it's again coming back to the production function, right? Very simple production function, output is a function of input. Now, what are the factors of production?
Labor and capital.
Agriculture, land, labor, capital. Now, if you look at the service sector output, you don't need land much. You need labor, quality labor, and capital. But if you look at manufacturing sector, you need land, labor, capital. Land is, what all things happen in the country. Land is much more controversial than anything. Now, if you want to start a manufacturing sector, you need to have land. So I don't think there was any clarity on the land in this country, even today in my view. Maybe South is slightly better after 25 years. But if you look at 25 years back, I think we had a much difficult problems in terms of the land. So at the same time, we had much better educated manpower, which were competitive compared to other countries. Even today, service sector in India is most competitive compared to any country in the world. Okay, so we chose that path. It's not necessary that everybody, if you are part of the globalization, you will only trade with other countries when you have a comparative advantage. Okay, so we had a comparative advantage in service sector, right? China had a comparative advantage in manufacturing sector. So we had a much better trade relationship between services and manufacturing sector. Now, you cannot force India to have a manufacturing sector which is not competitive at all. Now there are efforts. I mean, there are efforts Make in India and all those things. But even there, I find it the recent policy of banning laptop, right? Can you compete with Apple at today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, next year? You cannot. So you need to take time. So you need to grow in a manner that you'll become competitive with a trading partner. Then only you will survive. Okay. So I think the point I'm trying to say is that we took a strategy of agriculture to service and then coming to manufacturing. It's a part of the globalization game, right? Where you are competitive in the service sector and you are trying to trade that with the other competitor which is competitive in the manufacturing sector. So ultimately, one of the aspects that we should focus for the next 25 years is the productivity component. Okay, so the productivity is something very low in manufacturing sector in Indian context. So then what is the determinants of productivity? Again, you look at RBI website, there is a CLEMS project, capital, labor, energy, material, services. Okay, so you look at that and see where we are competitive compared to other countries. So we are growing. In fact, the latest 2019 estimate says productivity growth of India in manufacturing sector is much more than the productivity growth of manufacturing in the China. So we are showing some signs of growth in the manufacturing sector productivity. I think if it continues, we will be increasing the share of manufacturing. And there are two things that need to happen. Land issues have to be sorted out and the labor market reforms. Okay, so labor market reforms again started at a very small way in some of the states. In fact, there are labor codes which is passed by the parliament. Some states have adopted, I think last month Karnataka adopted that, the flexible labor market. So if other states also adopt, I think we will be having a much more flexible production systems for manufacturing sector. So it's a work in progress in my view. I must say that we are in almost like in a much better position compared to 20 years back, right?
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? You can also share questions in my email. I mean, you can yeah.
Professor Bhanumurthy sir, for enlightening us on the Indian economy. Your perceptive analysis of pre- and post-pandemic policies were truly captivating. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. We have a token of appreciation for sir. May I request our revered Chancellor, Sri K. Chakravarti sir, to hand over our token of appreciation to Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Thank you, sir. We have a quick 10-minute tea break now. Tea and snacks are being served on the lawns right outside this hall. We will assemble after the tea break, which is about 10:50 a.m. Please be on time. Saram.
where he played a vital role in India's monetary policy formulation. Apart from this,
Sir has been assigned various assignments to lend his expertise. One such role is forming the Financial Stability Department and drafting the Financial Stability Report for the Central Bank of Oman. Dr. Rath has extensive publications to his credit in the areas of national accounts, monetary economics, banking, fiscal policy, and numerous prestigious journals. In addition, he has illustrious accolades with awards such as the Bharat Vikas Award in 2017, the Rashtriya Gaurav Award in 2022, and most recently, the Mahatma Gandhi Lifetime Achievement Award in 2023. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Deba Prasad Rath to deliver his thoughts on the topic entitled Role of Fiscal Policy in Post-Pandemic Economic Recovery.
Om Sri Sai Ram. I offer my salutations to Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai, who has been instrumental in transforming the lives of millions around the globe. Esteemed Chancellor Sri K. Chakravarti, sir, distinguished guests of the conference, faculty members of the university, and dear students. It provides me immense pleasure to deliver this special lecture at Sri Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, a unique institution established by Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai, which provides value-based education completely free of cost. Now, just in the previous talk, you heard from the previous speaker the fiscal side of the story with regard to the macro stabilization policy that we had and the range of comments he gave as an academician. Lot of stuff that I wish to cover would also be there, where I would be moving little fast forward just to keep the content coverage from your point of view intact. Now, when we talk about the role of fiscal policy in this macro stabilization during the post-COVID times, we have to understand what is fiscal policy. And you have given, he gave you the national income equation from the demand and supply side. And then I just want your attention through all these very famous quotes given by authorities starting from John Maynard Keynes, 1936, that during the Great Depression times, how fiscal policy worked. And then during the the GFC, Global Financial Crisis times, Stephen G. Sacheti, who said very lovely words. It really explains what should be the spirit of fiscal stimulus. It should be timely, it should be targeted, it should be temporary, and most importantly, they have to be sufficiently large to be for the impact, not large enough, which will lead to the risk deterioration in the country. If you look at India's fiscal stimulus program in a global perspective, possibly we are there in that sweet spot. Then the next two you see, and the last one particularly, fiscal policy plays an essential role in economic recovery during crisis times. You see, it's a very generic definition. Now, I will give you a perspective that when we had this crisis, once in a lifetime crisis, or global shock, which was a health shock, which was a demand shock, which was a supply shock, all negative, and then followed immediately by the Ukraine war. So it's a really turbulent time, very stressed time. And then just monetary policy, just fiscal policy, or just for that matter, any regulatory policy or macroprudential policy would not work. So they have to work in cohesion. And that's what happened. So globe at large talks about how the three most important policies, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and macroprudential policy, they all worked. And that's how you see global growth really rising. Of course, certain territories, you have all those recession, stagflation, and all those risks. But by and large, you see that we are recovering quite well. Of course, there are challenges in the medium term. Now, why did that happen? You cannot ascribe the success to any single policy, and analysis at IMF suggests that all these three policies, fiscal, monetary, and macro-pro, all these three worked, and why they worked well is because of the buildup of buffer which they had. Suppose it is monetary policy in India, from 2016 you had inflation targeting, and from double digit you had come to the sweet spot of 4 to 5%. If it is fiscal policy, you had very responsible fiscal policy around the globe. Of course, there were problems because that's a very important policy instrument to handle crisis. So we had some buffer there, and we had some buffer in the other policies. Now, this crisis is not going to be the last crisis. We are still on it, and we may see more crises in the future. In that context, what is very important is the role of fiscal policy. What will happen is, when you have a crisis, you have a particular section or particular segment or a particular category of the sector which will be suffering, which will be vulnerable. To handle that, you need a policy which is targetable, and that job is done by fiscal policy. Because the monetary policy, you do your interest rate setting, and it's a broad-based policy. You will impact everybody in the economy. But fiscal policy has that power to, to address the particular section. Energy price, you have a particular instrument. Poverty reduction, you have a particular instrument. Farmers, you have a particular instrument. So that's why potency of fiscal policy has to increase. So that's the point with which, we go, the journey that I have set out for you. I will talk about fiscal policy is all about taking and giving away something. That's what Bhanumurthy was mentioning. You take taxes and you give expenditure. So that's your fiscal policy. During the pandemic, we will see all the major key fiscal indicators, what happened on the revenue front, what happened on the expenditure front, all that he was discussing, deficit what happened, debt what happened, and financing of deficit. Now, these are all based on headline numbers. Then what I thought is, because I am addressing researchers here and the academic, people with academic bent of mind, we are preparing researchers for future. I thought that I will give you a window of opportunity to understand what key research we are doing in RBI on the fiscal front. Now, Reserve Bank is a monetary authority. As I was we are discussing with the Chancellor, sir. The research department which is there in Reserve Bank, we have a population of around 200 plus. We have a pan-India presence. We have a number of publications. Some I have handed over to the Vice-Chancellor. And we have a distribution policy. Everything is web uploaded. Hard copies are there. We are becoming environment friendly, so we are trying to curtail the numbers, but nonetheless, we have all that. Why RBI is very sensitive to fiscal research is one point, because what happens is, if you look at the RBI's balance sheet, this sits as net domestic assets. All the G-Sec that we are doing, that will come on the asset side. And then you have the money stock that we was mentioning just now. whatever market borrowing that we are doing to finance the fiscal deficit of center and state combined, that will lead to a supply of GSEC or SDL. And that supply will lead to determination of yield, sovereign yield, GSEC yield, 10-year yield. And that becomes the benchmark for interest rate determination of all other segments of the financial market. Whether it is bank lending, you have this external benchmark-based lending rate now. So what happens here, if the bond yield increases, cost of borrowing for government will increase, and it will have a tremendous impact on the G and I that he was mentioning, I public sector. If cost of borrowing increases in a developing economy like ours, it will put a hard constraint on the ability of the government to spend, whether it is G or I. So the GSEC yield is a public good. That's what our governor says, because it is a very important interest rate benchmark for banking, for all other segments of the financial market. That these are two most important reasons that we have a very keen eye on what is happening on the fiscal trends. So looking at all that doesn't help in a sense that, we have to get to the underlying dynamics. That's what we seek to do in our state of economy. Every month we give our fiscal trend analysis, and the number of reports that we prepare, they appear in RBI bulletin, they appear in occasional papers, they appear as box items in annual report, and several other publications. And they form, as I was mentioning, evidence-based policy advice of RBI to government. That is still another role for RBI. We are advisors on economic matters to Government of India. So how do you do that unless you do strong research on the fiscal side? So we have a fiscal team which is with me now. As I was saying, for the last 3 years it has come to me. Earlier I was a monetary policy person, now fiscal policy has come. And then what we have done, keeping an eye on our, the requirements expected from us, what we have done, we have central finance team which look at budget. The moment the budget is presented, immediately on the same, in the same month, you will have a budget analysis. And some of these, the numbers like seventh horse this time, when the budget was presented in the central board, our top management made a presentation. So what is the impact on potential growth on Indian economy? So immediately our central state finance and all other research teams, they worked and they tried to find out how much would come from the capex drive, how much would come from the taxation benefits, how much would come from the climate activity. So all these drives that were contained in the budget, in terms of their impact on the potential growth, we found out and we gave some numbers, some estimates, I think around 80 basis points. So if you add all that, so that gives the necessary evidence-based policy again. And that will take a number of years. Potential growth is, not immediately. So immediately you will reap some benefit and, over the years. And few of the other research that we have done, I'll give you a flavor depending on time, maybe 2-3 key items. In this slide, what you see is, this is what Professor Bhanumurthy was explaining. Here the only difference is I is 1, which contains both private and public. So all your crowding in, crowding out arguments, they are all contained within that. Now, here I will just add that additional flavor that if fiscal policy is doing this, and we gave credit to monetary policy for handling the crisis, what monetary policy has done. Now, if you look at the pandemic times, what happened? Fiscal policy you have heard. Only difference is here I will make a comment that fiscal policy is more direct. If I change my G, revenue expenditure, it has immediately an impact on C. Clear? Salary, or whatever household are getting, if they will stop getting, naturally it will have an impact on C. And if they curtail their capital expenditure, I will be affected. So, and the effect is direct. You do the budget, immediately there would be impact. And transmission lag, in any policy you have recognition lag, implementation lag, transmission lag, all the action lags. So all these lags, if you compare, fiscal policy is very direct, very immediate. Now come to monetary policy, what will happen? I will change my interest rate, R, market rate, what will happen? C will be affected. Households, if I have to pay more interest, I will reduce my consumption. If it's a consumption loan economy, like US. If I raise my R, I was just mentioning that the cost of borrowing will increase, my I will be less, okay? G, there will be some impact again, how much they will borrow to finance their G and I public sector. And even NX, net export, is a function of the exchange rate. So because of the sensitivity of exchange rate to interest rate, you will have some impact there also. But as we are just discussing, NX is a function of your global growth outlook or global trade outlook for that matter. I think I have already discussed these points. It's a tool for supporting growth very clearly, and monetary is somewhat more indirect and fiscal policy is more direct. But during the crisis times, what happened? If you look at the way Monetary Policy Committee deliberations, which we are putting out as minutes after 14 days of the meeting, I think yesterday, day before yesterday, put out the last round. Please go through that. You will understand a great deal about Indian macroeconomy. Increasingly, Indian monetary policy has taken, growth as its very important objective. But if you look at the statute, it is price stability, keeping in mind growth, but we have become more growth sensitive, and accordingly, interest rate movement was done during the crisis time. Fiscal policy has become more sensitive to, they should be sensitive to growth, but they have become more sensitive to inflation. Now you have tomato inflation high tomato inflation, you see government, making those arrangements and selling it at low prices. So the supply side response that authorities make is through fiscal policy, and those policies, even through trade policies, those duty structure, you see that they have helped tremendously in making available larger supply of goods and services in the country. So what I would say is that there is a shared mechanism or shared participation in terms of the policies. Macro policy is both monetary, fiscal. Monetary is more of price stability and growth also to be kept in mind. We are a developing economy. Fiscal policy is more of growth, employment, maximization of welfare, also inflation, because macro stability is both growth and inflation. So both the arms work like, in cohesion. But during crisis times, if India is in a sweet spot now, as far as, bright spot in a turbulent world, this sharing of objectives, that has helped in a big way. And the complementarity, policy coordination, which we were discussing. I think we have discussed all this. Now let me give some numbers. We discussed several things We'll give the timeline, numbers, and how the government responded. January 30 was the announcement by WHO regarding this COVID. March 11, pandemic, WHO, livelihood, all that we know. With all this, what happened is our economy contracted in the first quarter to the extent of 23.6, around 24%, which was a historic contraction. And that's when government responded through its stimulus measures in 3 rounds. So here we have given little global flavor. Now, if you look at the stimulus, the highest stimulus has come mostly in the developed countries. You see, this one, 7.5 to 10% and more than that. So these are the countries. Whereas India is here. So if now you try to understand what Stephen Sacchetti had said. It should be timely. So immediately you saw that FM making those announcements that will come to. But in terms of action, we are very responsible. We have not really gone above the board. So again, these are selected economies. You see the advanced economies, see the length of the line. And if you see the emerging market economies, it is here, only this country, but India is, okay. So in a cross-country global perspective, we appear very responsible. That is just one part of the story. Now, during April 20 to March 2021, these are the fiscal packages that were announced. Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, all these amounts, if you add up to, it is coming to PM's health package, revenue loss, Atmanirbhar 1, then this extension, Atmanirbhar 2, 3. If you include all that, it is coming to 17 lakh crores, let us say. And this is the timeline in which the programs, the schemes were announced. And they were all immediate action. The effort was to take care of the life and livelihood. That's where we started. So immediately, this Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana was announced. You gave, already you were giving free food, 5 kilo of cereals and all. You increase that. All those we have tabulated allocations under PMGKY, and the expenditure was this. So if you take 2021, it came to 1.1% of GDP. No, sorry, 1.1 lakh crore, and then 1.4 lakh crore in the next year, and 22-23 April to December is 1.2. So cumulative that was being discussed in the last lecture is come to 3.7. Then there was this direct benefit transfer, cash transfer. That comes to, under various schemes, comes to this, 27,000 crore. State governments also chipped in. The earlier was central government, state governments have given 9,217 crores. Now, there was very important piece of research on this. What was the effect of all this? IMF said that extreme poverty second bullet, proportion which is less than 1% didn't go up despite this pressing problem. And World Bank said extreme poverty fell. And now there is another Niti Aayog estimate which has come, is this multi-dimensional poverty, and there also it has shown that poverty has come down. So if you have spent so much, it has also given you these benefits. And they were all not necessarily revenue. As I was mentioning, as you went from Atmanirbhar 1, 2, 3, you see that initially it was consumption based, targeted for poor people, vulnerable people. Then slowly the capital component came in. In 2 it was some percentage was there, and in 3 it became largely capital. So the contrast between post GFC policy and this the COVID policy, post-COVID COVID policy, fiscal trend was that it became more and more capex driven. So that was the beauty. And then while keeping the overall stimulus at a very reasonable level. So these are the details which I was mentioning. These were more of consumption. Slowly capex came in, and we enabled travel and all that when the lockdown opened. And in capex 3, we started giving a lot of benefits from center to states also to enable them for going for larger capex. And the scheme of PLI came then, initially with 10 identified sectors. Now, if you look at the fiscal cost, as I was mentioning, it's not much. And if you look at the cash outflow, even it is much less. So these are the details of those schemes, if you are interested. And again here, when this geopolitical tension came immediately, following the crisis, how on the oil front we changed the pricing mechanism. And here also the concept was how to make the availability of stuff and how to see that consumers, households are less affected. Now, if you look at what are the positive impact, pandemic policies have worked, and they are reflected in numbers that we will show you in terms of growth and all. Global domestic financial conditions that froze up at the onset of the crisis responded to the central bank actions. Bond yields eased to historic lows, and capital flows turned mobile as risk appetite returned. Emerging markets as an asset class became the flavor of the season. So we had a lot of positive impacts. Another very underlying trend which was happening on the fiscal front was this, fiscal marksmanship. If you budget for something in the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, or when you revise the figure, you get the actual, you should be close to what you budgeted. If X you budgeted, you got close to X, then it is called fiscal marksmanship. But if you budgeted for X and you got 2X, then it is lack of fiscal marksmanship. Now, if you see the post-pandemic years, this is another thing which has improved significantly in the fiscal trends. Fiscal balance, again, countrywide, and gross debt, if you see India sitting here. So it is almost at the middle of the, range of countries. So it looks quite respectable. Deficit also the same thing there. Yeah, so impact assessment, you see some of these numbers. The average for, yeah, the real GDP, 7.4, and now you have these numbers. This was that bad year, but so we have almost come to the pre-pandemic trends. Real GVA, you look at it, they look also quite good. CPI, of course, that is our optimal inflation in our monetary policy framework, and we are yet to reach there. That's why, you look at governor's policy statements, Arjuna's eye, more than Arjuna's eye. We are ready to, willing to do anything that is required. So all that is shaping the, market, conditioning the market, and then this is a work in progress. It should happen. So you see the range of numbers, they look quite good. So we would say that what I said initially is all the policies have worked. If they worked for the globe, they have also worked more for India. Similarly, if you look at these numbers, fiscal numbers are also looking quite well behaved. If you look at trends in fiscal deficit, see, from here, 13.1, the pandemic year, we are coming down to this, and here we have taken center and states together, because when we are talking about the government finance, it is both center and states. Now, one question that we had analyzed in our state finance report is why this happened, 13.1. We introduced the concept seizure effect there. We said that seizure works like this. No? So when you have a shock of this dimension, revenue falls, and you have more of expenses required on health front, on several other things. So seizure effect led to this, the spike in the deficit, and particularly for both the segments. Debt, we had a discussion just now, it is close to 90%. He was referring to this number. Now, you look at it, we are on a downward trend now, and now we have come to 82. So in a matter of 2 years, you see the reduction in debt GDP ratio. This raises the question of why, I was saying why central bank is interested for fiscal analysis. Because if the government finance is not sustainable, then it raises a question with regard to even monetary policy action. Because what will happen is, if in the eye of the market investors or rating agents, you feel that, everybody feels that their finance is unsustainable, they can't repay so much of debt, you get into all this capital flow problem, you have rating downgrade, you have seen those activities happening on US now, and it will impact your rate of interest, the GSEC yield that I was mentioning, the public good is becoming a public bad. So all those problems will come. So monetary policy keeps a very close eye on the fiscal policy. And this type of trend, if you go back to the FRBM days, you see, you had a episode here. We had gone up and then we came down. Part of it is FRBM and part of it is the fiscal dynamics. And then we are on a falling debt trajectory till here, and then slowly it increased here, and now we are here. But very interesting thing which is happening is again we are falling. So the challenge is to keep on reducing. And then we did some analysis, because the moment we get those IMF questions, IMF team visits RBI and government, is a very important part of their questions. They keep on asking, is it sustainable? Because you have gone there very high. So what we try to say is that it may be high, but it is sustainable, and give some of those analytical reasons which are driven from our research. What is very important is the donor condition. the rate of interest should be less than the rate of growth. If that happens, then your interest payments and solvency criteria is met. And there are other conditions, but then we looked at around 10 years, Anup, and we saw that R minus G is negative for, I think, most of the years, barring 1 year or something, whenever, one particular year we had a positive figure. Was it 17, 18 or something? COVID year. So that's a bad year. So point to make is that debt is high, but what gives comfort is that Domer's condition is met, and it is being met on a very long-term trend basis. And another very important thing which we are doing now is the quality of government expenditure that was being mentioned in the previous session. Revenue expenditure is unproductive, is consumption, the multiplier is low, the center is high, state is low, all that discussion you saw. But when you come to capital outlay, we have found out the fiscal multiplier for state is higher, isn't it, compared to center. And in a scenario where you are on a recovery phase, when the GDP is recovering, the multipliers take even higher value. So they give you more GDP benefit. If all that is happening, as our research is suggesting, you can believe this, isn't it? The fiscal multipliers are playing out their role in giving you greater GDP dividends, and then debt GDP ratio is falling. So these are all very welcome trends, but the challenge is to keep on working on that. Quality of expenditure has to be improved, not only at the center level, but also at the state level. We saw some municipal analysis that was being mentioned, and partly answering to his question, we are also going to have a Panchayat finance report this time. We are planning. So with that, what will happen is fiscal analysis, which was earlier confined to which was more center-centric or union-centric, had already come to states, and RBI is the sole repository of all the time series data, and we have become the primary data source for state finance for a very long time, from 50s, I think. And then we devoted a separate report, state finance report, which has started coming from 2000, I think, or there around. So you have central government finance analysis, which appears in the budget. Nadhanael takes care. And then state finance report. And last year we had the maiden municipal finance report, which came on November 10, 2022. And this year we are working on the Panchayat report. So what we see is that at all levels, we have chosen this, you have this RECO, revenue expenditure capital. 1 minute. Before that, let me cover this. I was telling that the net market borrowing to the extent of here, if gross fiscal deficit is 100, 66 rupees is being financed by the market borrowing. And that is what determines your bond yield. So just keep that point in mind. And then guarantee is another question. In the COVID times, you saw that you expect that the guarantees should increase, but that also didn't happen. If you look at the long-term trend, you see it is here. So that should give further comfort to the fiscal trends. I think that RECO, revenue expenditure, is not there. Okay, let me go there. Yeah. So, how will you say that the quality of expenditure has increased? So there are several competing indicators. You look at capital outflow, capital outlay, and look at their growth, compare with GDP growth. You take capital outlay, GDP ratio. You take capital outlay by gross fiscal deficit. that was being mentioned. What we thought is that from a practitioner's point of view, the revenue expenditure is not less important in India. Suppose I build a university, it is capital outlay, it is just brick and mortar. But if I have to staff it with good faculty, I have to pay salary. That is revenue expenditure. So it is very imprudent to say that revenue expenditure is all unproductive. Part of India's revenue expenditure also goes for capital formation, revenue grants. So all those thoughts led us to believe that we should look at the revenue expenditure capital outlay ratio. Both will increase, look at the ratio, and then our team, they worked on what is the threshold revenue expenditure capital outlay ratio, RECO ratio as we call. We found that that gray line, this one, is for the center, is around little less than 8, and for the state it is around 7, let us say. And then you plot the actual RECO ratio, you see it came, then it became bad, because high revenue, high RECO ratio means it is in this territory, it is leading to less of growth. So revenue expenditure has to be at certain level given 1 unit of capital outlay. So if it exceeds that, it hurts growth. Now look at these years. What you see is that our revenue expenditure capital outlay is slowly, coming down, and the trajectory in a sense is like this. States also something similar is happening. So this combination, the composition of the two expenditures is looking quite growth positive at the moment. And then capital outlay has to happen over years. Just do it 1 year and then leave, it doesn't help. So it's a long duration process, and so it will give benefit for a number of years. Cumulative effect would be much high, but you have to do it. And you have to do it in areas where you feel that it will lead to better logistics and all, movements, transport, and it will all lead to low inflation. I think government is trying to identify those sectors. It is investing in roads, highways, ports, airports. So all that should help. There are several indicators, but they are quite understandable. But this RECO ratio, we thought, is a very good indicator, which gives weightage to both revenue and capital as far as their growth impact is concerned. Now, let me come back to here. What is our fiscal consolidation strategy? If you look at this budget, the last 23-24 budget, the deficit, the desired trajectory for deficit has been given, and we see that fiscal marksmanship is there. The finance secretary says that we will be achieving exactly, the number which we have put out in the budget. With all that, deficit will be kept in control, and that will help in keeping the debt ratio also under control. All that we have already discussed. These are the silver linings. Now, these points I have already made. Now, if you have done well till now, it's not that, you are at the end of the crisis and again you will get a crisis after 100 years. Crisis can happen now anytime. It can happen on the climate front as the public, the discourse goes. So, if that is the case, you have to be in a state of preparedness. You have to be future ready, and that's where you have to sharpen your fiscal tools. You have to have fiscal space, you have to have very good revenue buoyancy, you should use the artificial intelligence and, AI/ML techniques, and all that government is doing. And you have estimates that 20 to 25,000 crores every month GST collection can be ascribed to all those technological drives where, you know, the chance of somebody, you know, doing fraud and cheating and not paying. So all that is being taken care of. And I'm sure this is a work in progress. The rate rationalization is happening. So all that gives the belief that we are on the right track. On the revenue buoyancy, and we are also on the right track as far as the composition of expenditure is concerned. Now the debt, as I said, looks sustainable, although it is high, because it is now starting moving back. With that, I just mentioned some of our work that we are doing. I already mentioned the last point. Most of these points I have mentioned. Now, how much time I have? 15 minutes? Okay. Now, then I should give around three studies. What we did, let me start from here. I just now was mentioning that if my debt GDP ratio increases by 1%, how much would be the bond yield impact? What will happen to bond yield? It will go up or come down? If my debt GDP ratio from 80, it becomes 81%. What will happen to the bond yield? Ceteris paribus. You have more supply of securities. More supply means less price. Less price means more. Price and yield are negatively. Okay, so yield will increase. That is a normal phenomenon. But we also know, thanks to RBI research by our, I think Deputy Governor had a paper, MD Patra, where we saw that it responds to multiple factors. It responds to inflation. But as I was just mentioning, with inflation targeting framework, we have become quite disciplined on the inflation front, excepting this 1 or 2 years. So that has kept a moderating, that has given a moderating healing touch to yield, less inflation, growth is doing well, then supply is increasing. So this particular paper which appeared, the last issue, Nadhanael, this one, last issue, August issue of Bulletin, where we examined that now we have looked at the supply side, what happens on the demand side. There are several investors. You have banks, usually SLR, through that route, preemption route, a lot of bank investment happens. Banks typically will not trade too much. You expect them, their business strategy is like that. So they will hold till maturity, so they are not very yield sensitive. But look at the non-banks. If I am an insurance company, if I am a PF, provident fund, mutual fund, if I am a retail investor, I will be very yield sensitive. If I get a higher yield, I will behave in a particular way compared to a lower yield. So we did that, and we saw that during this COVID times, a very new thing is happening on the demand pattern of the GSEC market. And it is a global phenomenon. Banks are becoming increasingly less and less, they are acquiring or they are becoming less strong in their ownership pattern, although they remain predominant. But non-banks are increasing. And that's what we have said, that marginal investment in a year, suppose I am floating this much, and I look at how, what proportion who has taken, then we saw that the non-banks are picking up more GSEC. So what is its impact? That we did. And we found very interesting thing, and that table you have given, so, yeah. Actually, when 1% debt to GDP ratio increases, the bond yield increases by 9.5 to 10 basis points. Just the demand side, the supply side. If they are taken by, banks, only, the yield would increase to 9.8 to 10.3. And if they are taken by non-banks, they become 9 to 9.6. So, to the extent the non-banks are increasing their ownership of GSEC, it is also helping the GSEC yield to remain moderate. And this is a global stylized fact, and this is also borne out from Indian data on an analysis of data on ownership from 2009. Around 15 years of data we have analyzed. So this is one research, and this has a lot of potential. You know, this research can be taken further. Why is this happening? What is the business model of the non-banks? So this is a very rich area, I believe, and a lot of new work is happening. So this also gives a comfort in the sense that we are also becoming more non-bank oriented. Our yields should not go up too high, which is a public good, as I mentioned. Is India's debt sustainable? That analysis we have done. Capex and economic growth, what we did is that we did a study and we gave some that study, have you taken that index? Which? This one? So what we did here, we took some quality of expenditure indicators. I gave a number of them, and we took developed an index, and we saw that when the index increases, it leads to higher GSDP growth. So that is borne out from the states panel of 20 or so many states we have taken, and this is borne out from a number of years of data period. So that also gives a comfort, because even the states are now increasing their capex. And even here we try to analyze what are the factors which lead to higher capex decision for the states. And we found out many of the things. Their capex in the year T-1 and several other factors, they lead to higher capex. And they seems to be this should be on a long-term trend. So that also gives comfort. So these studies at the center and state level, they have analyzed the underlying trends in this way, and these insights should help. Now coming to coverage of the fiscal statistics, which is a G20 data gap initiative, we have gone to the municipal, and now with this tier 3, the gap which we expect to complete, that should give us more fiscal transparency, and fiscal statistics would be on very stable front. Transparent and stable front. I think with that, let me close my discussion. I think it is close to one hour. If there are any questions, we will take it. And this is just to introduce Anup, who is the backroom boy here. He made a lot of effort to put all this together. Yeah.
lag effect for fiscal act. From the lag effect for multiple transmission method. What are the measures that RBI is taking? Fiscal actions are becoming barriers in order to minimize the lag effect.
One region That's the question, or you have another? No. So one point, why I was mentioning the monetary policy is less direct, indirect. It's because of the lag, 2 to 3 quarters. And normally you expect the lag to come down if your financial markets get integrated. Because the first leg of transaction happens in the money market, okay? Then, it travels to several other markets, and then it goes to the real economy, whether it is your C, G, I, and E-F, through several other channels. So if you take the entire mechanism, it will take time. And, as per our latest analysis, I think it is 2 to 3 quarters. We also have a quarterly projection model, which is the, which works as our quantitative workhorse for our monetary policy projections. So there also we are getting similar numbers. Now, what we have done to address that concern, to keep the lag less, is one is this external benchmark lending rate, EBLR. So the moment, you set a policy repo rate, the banks are supposed to set their lending rate in line with repo rate. So that is called external benchmark lending rate. And that has happened 2-3 few years back. And we have seen that if you look at the weighted average lending rate, weighted average deposit rate, the fresh segment, the outstanding rates, what we see is that they're improving now. So that is one way. Secondly, money market rate, that is the conduit through which all this transmission will happen, and we are keeping a strong eye on that. So all this should help, and all of them are really helping in keeping that lag reasonable. Fiscal policy works the best when you have monetary stability, and monetary policy works when there is fiscal. So macroeconomic stability is the common ground. If you do not have that, what will happen is even monetary transmission will not work. If you have debt sustainability problem, nothing will work. So that's why it is very important that they complement each other. And I was mentioning that the shared objective, that is also working. So in that sense, I think on many fronts, we are at the sweet spot.
Regarding the repo rate, so is there a balance where out of 100 rupees, how much should go in? Do we have any real number of this?
That I showed in that graph. Anup, why don't you explain? Where is that? Yeah.
Look at this. For states and 7.54.
What we also did, there are some of these intergovernmental transfers. So we did the analysis also for the combined finance. And there the relationship is even starker, that we are at multi-year low, and in terms of distance from that sweet spot, a sweet line, we are there for a number of years now. And if that trend continues, you will have the right mix, the question you are raising. We will have for, so many units of capital outlay, what exactly should be your revenue expenditure? And revenue expenditure is also important. That point I made. And that's where even the government is talking about the effective revenue deficit instead of revenue deficit, where you adjust for the capital outlay component of the revenue expenditure. Thank you. Thank you.
going ahead throughout history in the long run? Is this good enough mix for a long run stabilization of the
I think the jury is not yet, jury is still sitting on judgment on that issue. I see a perspective that I think Anup will have that statement somewhere, who said that monetary policy should work on the mechanism which is assigned to monetary price stability. Fiscal policy should be growth. And these are all, fiscal policy should be on growth, and these are all very normal time configurations. What I said is the crisis time response. Now, you have to see whether you have a normal time or a crisis time. If it is crisis time, all these sharing mechanisms should work. That's my very purely personal view, as much as whatever I said is personal view of the author or presenter. These are not RBI's official views, but coming to your point, it depends. So if tomorrow again you have a crisis, maybe you will have a continuation of the mechanism, sharing mechanism, and we should work in together and in cohesion, complementarity. Maybe that's a very ideal thing to do even in normal times, but then jury is still out. I see views which say that monetary policy, maybe Nadhanael will have some comment. Exactly. So if your state demands that, you should have that. And we have shown that we have that. And globe at large has shown that they have that. That partly explains why we see the resiliency in the numbers that we are seeing. All right. Thank you. Namaskar. And we really enjoyed a very participative session. Thank you all.
Our heartfelt appreciation to Dr. Deba Prasad Rath sir. Your presentation was a harmonious blend of clarity, insight, and knowledge. Thank you for coming here and encouraging us today. We have a token of appreciation for sir. May I request our revered Chancellor, Sri K. Chakravarti sir, to hand over our token of appreciation to Dr. Deba Prasad Rath. Thank you, sir. We now break for lunch. I request everyone to assemble for post-lunch session at 1:20 p.m. That's like a little more than an hour from now. So please be on time. Thank you, Sarah.
it's really left.